The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, each droplet creating tiny rivers that distorted the city lights below. Marcus Davidson stood motionless in his corner office, his reflection barely visible in the dark glass, a tall, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 38, Marcus had built Davidson Industries from a small tech startup into a Fortune 500 corporation. His company dominated the software industry, with offices in 12 countries and a net worth that placed him among the youngest billionaires in America. The business magazines called him the digital titan, and Wall Street analysts hung on his every quarterly report. But success had come at a price that Marcus had willingly paid, or so he told himself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany desk behind him was pristine, save for 3 computer monitors displaying real-time stock prices, profit margins, and global market trends. No family photos cluttered the space. No personal mementos softened the harsh edges of corporate efficiency. Even the artwork on his walls had been selected by an interior designer, expensive pieces chosen for their investment value rather than any emotional connection. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Davidson, the Tokyo meeting has been rescheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow. Also, your mother called again." Marcus didn't look away from the window. "Tell her I'm in meetings all week and cancel my dinner with the Hartwell Group. I'll review their proposal tonight instead." "Sir, that's the 3rd dinner cancellation this month. They'll wait," Marcus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Money talks louder than manners in this business, Sarah. They need us more than we need them." The intercom clicked off, leaving Marcus alone with the sound of rain and the distant hum of the city 42 floors below. This was his kingdom, a world of numbers, contracts, and calculated risks, where emotions were liabilities and personal connections were weaknesses to be exploited. Marcus had learned this lesson early in his career. Fresh out of Stanford with an MBA and burning ambition, he'd watched colleagues stumble because they'd mixed business with pleasure, allowed sentiment to cloud judgment, or prioritized relationships over results. He'd sworn never to make those mistakes. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother Nathan. "Mom's 65th birthday is next weekend. Family dinner at the house. Don't even think about skipping this one." Marcus deleted the message without responding. Nathan lived in their hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa, working as a high school math teacher and raising 3 kids with his wife, Jennifer. He'd never understood Marcus's drive, often accusing him of forgetting where he came from and who he used to be. The truth was, Marcus remembered exactly who he used to be, a kid from a middle-class family who'd worn hand-me-down clothes and worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for college. He'd clawed his way out of that life through sheer determination and relentless focus. Every sacrifice had been worth it to reach this pinnacle of success. His executive assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Davidson, the cleaning crew is here for the building. Will you be staying much longer?" Marcus glanced at his Rolex, 11:30 p.m. Most of his employees had left hours ago, but he often worked past midnight, finding the empty office conducive to his best thinking. "Another hour or 2. Make sure security knows I'm still here." Sarah nodded and left, her footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. Marcus returned to his desk, opening a thick file containing acquisition proposals. Davidson Industries was always hunting for smaller companies to absorb, expand, or eliminate as competition. It was a predatory but profitable strategy that had made him incredibly wealthy. As he reviewed the financial statements of a promising startup in Austin, his mind wandered to the quarterly board meeting scheduled for next week. The shareholders, expected another record-breaking quarter, and Marcus never disappointed them. His reputation for delivering results was unshakable. But lately, an odd restlessness had begun to creep into his perfectly ordered life. Success had become routine, achievements felt hollow, and the thrill of the next deal lasted shorter and shorter periods. He told himself it was simply the natural evolution of a mature businessman, the need for bigger challenges and greater conquests. What he didn't acknowledge, even to himself, was the growing emptiness that wealth couldn't fill. The rain continued its assault on the windows as Marcus worked through the proposals, making notes in his precise handwriting. His penthouse apartment awaited him across town, 5,000 square feet of minimalist luxury that featured in architectural magazines but felt more like a showroom than a home. The refrigerator was stocked by a service, the plants were maintained by a gardener, and the housekeeper ensured everything remained pristine. He lived alone, just as he preferred it. Relationships required time and emotional energy that he channeled into his business. The few women he dated were usually fellow executives or socialites who understood that his work came first. These arrangements were efficient but temporary. Marcus had never found anyone who could compete with his first love, the intoxicating rush of closing a major deal. Around midnight, Marcus finally closed the last file and stretched his shoulders. The rain had intensified, turning the city into a watercolor painting of blurred lights and dark shadows. He gathered his things, grabbed his umbrella, and headed for the elevator. The parking garage beneath Davidson Industries was a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to house the luxury vehicles of his top executives. His midnight blue Bentley Continental sat in its reserved spot near the elevator, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Marcus had 3 other cars in his collection at home, but the Bentley was his favorite, a symbol of how far he'd traveled from his modest beginnings. As he approached his car, something caught his eye near the loading dock at the far end of the garage. 3 small figures huddled together behind a large dumpster, barely visible in the shadows. At first, he thought they might be homeless adults seeking shelter from the storm, but as he moved closer, his steps slowed. They were children. 3 little girls, probably no older than 7, pressed together for warmth under what appeared to be a single torn blanket. Their clothes were soaked from the rain, their hair matted against their small heads. They looked identical, triplets, with the same heart-shaped faces and dark, wide eyes that seemed too large for their thin features. Marcus stood frozen, his business mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Children didn't belong in corporate. Parking garages at midnight. Where were their parents? How had they gotten past security? Why were they here? The practical part of his brain immediately began calculating solutions. Call security, contact social services, have them removed quickly and quietly to avoid any potential liability for Davidson Industries. The last thing he needed was negative publicity about homeless children found on his property, but something stopped him from reaching for his phone. One of the girls had noticed him standing there. She whispered something to her sisters, and all 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him. They didn't run or cry out. Instead, they simply watched him with an expression that seemed far too mature for their young faces, a mixture of wariness and resignation that suggested they'd learned not to expect kindness from adults. Marcus took a step closer, and the girls instinctively pressed together more tightly. He could see they were shivering, their small bodies trembling from cold and possibly fear. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to handle this situation efficiently and move on, but something deeper, something he'd buried under years of corporate ruthlessness, kept him rooted in place. "Hey," he said softly, his voice echoing in the concrete chamber. "Are you okay?" The girls exchanged glances but didn't respond. The one in the middle, who seemed to be the spokesperson for the group, tilted her chin up defiantly despite her obvious vulnerability. Marcus crouched down, to their level, an action that felt foreign after years of literally and figuratively looking down on others from his position of power. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice, "but you can't stay here. It's not safe." The girl in the middle finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a strength that caught Marcus off. "God, we're not doing anything wrong, mister. We're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The three girls looked at each other again, having some silent conversation that only siblings could share. Finally, the middle girl spoke again, and her words would haunt Marcus. "Davidson for the rest of his life. We're waiting for our daddy to come back from heaven." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. These weren't just homeless children, they were orphans. 3 little girls who'd lost their father and somehow ended up sleeping in a parking garage, clinging to each other and what remained of their childhood innocence. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Davidson felt something crack in the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Standing in that cold, sterile parking garage, facing 3 small girls who should have been tucked safely in their beds, he realized that all his success, all his wealth, all his power meant absolutely nothing in the face of genuine human suffering. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the city clean, but Marcus knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The life he'd built, perfect in its isolation, efficient in its emotional emptiness, was about to be turned upside down by 3 7-year-old girls who'd just shattered his worldview with 6 simple words. What happened next would test everything. Marcus thought he knew about success, family, and what it truly meant to be wealthy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus remained crouched in front of the 3 girls, his expensive suit collecting moisture from the concrete floor. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across their small faces, making their eyes appear even larger and more haunting. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the steady drip of water from a ceiling pipe. The girl who had spoken, the apparent leader of the trio, studied Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. He was used to commanding boardrooms, intimidating competitors, and maintaining absolute control in every situation. Yet here he was, rendered speechless by 3 children who couldn't weigh more than 50 pounds each. "What are your names?" Marcus asked, his voice softer than he'd used in years. The girls exchanged another one of their silent conversations before the middle one responded. "I'm Emma. This is Chloe." She pointed to the girl on her left. "And that's Sophia." She indicated the girl on her right, who had been quietly crying, tears leaving clean tracks down her dirt-stained cheeks. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. 3 days, Emma replied matter-of-factly, as if sleeping in parking garages was a normal part of childhood. "We tried the park first, but the police kept telling us to move. Then we found the spot behind the grocery store, but the manager said he'd call social services if we didn't leave." Marcus felt something twist in his stomach. 3 days. These children had been surviving on the streets for 3 days, while he'd been negotiating million-dollar deals and worrying about stock prices. The contrast felt obscene. "Where's your mother?" he asked gently. Sophia, who had been silent until now, spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy went to sleep like Daddy. The cancer took her away last month." The simple, devastating truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Both parents dead. 3 7-year-old girls left completely alone in the world. His mind, trained to solve complex business problems, struggled to comprehend the magnitude of their situation. "Don't you have any family?" Grandparents? Aunts? Uncles? Marcus pressed, hoping for some glimmer of a solution that didn't involve the bureaucratic nightmare of the foster care system. Emma shook her head. Grandma Patterson died when we were 5. Mommy said Daddy's family lived far away and didn't like us very much. After Mommy got sick, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door helped sometimes, but she moved away last week. Chloe, who had been silently observing the conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to call the police now? Everyone always calls the police." The resignation in her voice broke something inside Marcus. These children had learned to expect disappointment, to anticipate abandonment. They'd been failed by every adult who should have protected them, and now they waited for him to fail them, too. "I should call someone," Marcus said carefully, "but not the police. There are people whose job it is to help children like you." "Foster homes," Emma said flatly. "We know about those. Mrs. Rodriguez told us they split up brothers and sisters sometimes. We're not going to let anyone separate us." The fierce protectiveness in her voice reminded Marcus of himself at that age, determined, stubborn, refusing to accept defeat even when the odds were stacked against him. But these children were facing challenges that made his own childhood struggles seem trivial in comparison. Marcus pulled out his phone, then hesitated. Once he made that call, he'd set in motion a chain of events he couldn't control. Social services would take the girls, process them through the system, and most likely place them in separate homes, despite their wishes to stay together. He'd seen the statistics in corporate social responsibility reports. The outcomes for children in foster care were often grim. "Mr. Davidson," a voice called out from across the parking garage, "is everything all right?" Marcus turned to see Jerry Hutchinson, the night security guard, approaching with a flashlight. Jerry was in his 60s, a former police officer who'd worked for Davidson Industries for nearly a decade. He was one of the few employees Marcus actually knew by name, mainly because Jerry had once prevented a break-in that could have compromised sensitive company data. "Jerry, I need you to see this," Marcus said, gesturing toward the girls. Jerry's flashlight illuminated the huddled triplets, and his weathered face immediately softened. "Oh, my Lord," he breathed. "How did these little ones get down here?" "They've been here for 3 days," Marcus explained. "Their parents are deceased, and they have nowhere else to go." Jerry crouched down beside Marcus, his grandfather instincts taking over. He'd raised 5 children of his own and had 12 grandchildren ranging from toddlers to teenagers. "Hello there, sweethearts. I'm Jerry. You must be cold and hungry." Something about Jerry's gentle manner seemed to reach the girls in a way Marcus's corporate efficiency couldn't. Sophia stopped crying, and even Emma's defensive posture relaxed slightly. "We had some crackers yesterday," Chloe admitted quietly, "but we finished them this morning." 3 days without proper food," Jerry muttered, shaking his head. He looked up at Marcus. "Sir, we can't leave them here, but if we call social services at this hour, it'll be a mess. Emergency placements, temporary shelters. These babies will be in the system before dawn." Marcus found himself in uncharted territory. Every business decision he'd ever made had been based on clear metrics, defined outcomes, and calculated risks. This situation offered none of those comforts. There were no spreadsheets to analyze, no market research to consult, no proven strategies to implement. "What do you suggest?" Marcus asked Jerry, surprising himself by seeking advice from a security guard about something that had nothing to do with corporate security. Jerry looked back at the girls, then at Marcus. "My wife, Carol, volunteers at St. Mary's Children's Shelter downtown. Good people there, but they're overcrowded and understaffed. These 3 would likely be separated immediately, at least until permanent placements could be found." "We won't be separated," Emma declared firmly. "We stick together no matter what." "I understand, honey," Jerry said gently. "But sometimes the system doesn't work the way we want it to." Marcus watched the interaction, his mind racing through possibilities. He could write a check large enough to ensure the girls were placed together in a quality facility. He could hire lawyers to expedite the adoption process for a suitable family. He could leverage his connections to cut through bureaucratic red tape. But all of those solutions would take time, and these children needed help now. They needed food, warm clothes, medical attention, and most importantly, they needed someone to care about their well-being immediately, not after weeks of processing through the system. "There's a 24-hour diner about 10 blocks from here," Marcus found himself saying. "The Sunshine Cafe. Jerry, could you drive them there, get them something to eat while I make some calls?" Jerry nodded. "Of course, sir. But what about—" "I'll figure out the rest," Marcus interrupted, though he had no idea what the rest would entail. "Just make sure they're safe and fed." Emma stood up, her sisters following her lead. Despite everything they'd been through, she maintained her role as protector and decision-maker. "Why are you helping us?" she asked Marcus directly. The question caught him off guard. Why was he helping them? The logical answer was that any decent human being would help 3 orphaned children, but Marcus knew his motivations ran deeper than simple decency. Looking at these girls, their resilience in the face of abandonment, their determination to stay together despite impossible odds, he saw something he'd lost years ago in his climb to the top. Because everyone deserves help when they need it. "Most," he said finally, the words feeling strange on his tongue. It wasn't something the old Marcus Davidson would have said, or even believed. Jerry helped gather the girls' few possessions, a small backpack containing some clothes, a worn stuffed animal that the 3 of them apparently shared, and a photograph that Emma clutched protectively against her chest. "That's our family," she explained when she noticed Marcus looking at the picture. "Before Daddy got sick and before Mommy went to heaven." Marcus glimpsed a happy family of 5, 2 parents and 3 identical little girls with matching smiles, standing in front of a modest house with a white picket fence. It was the kind of life he'd always dismissed as ordinary, unremarkable. Now it seemed precious beyond measure. As Jerry led the girls toward his security vehicle, Sophia turned back to Marcus. "Are you going to disappear like everyone else?" she asked with heartbreaking directness. Marcus looked into her eyes, so young, yet already marked by loss and disappointment. "No," he heard himself promise. "I'm not going anywhere." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise. The girls he'd built his entire adult life around, avoiding exactly this kind of commitment, this type of emotional entanglement that could complicate his carefully ordered existence. But as he watched Jerry drive away with 3 little girls, who'd lost everything except each other, Marcus realized that some decisions couldn't be made with spreadsheets and market analysis. Some choices required something he'd spent 20 years trying to eliminate from his life, faith in something beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. Standing alone in the parking garage where his transformation had begun, Marcus pulled out his phone and began making calls that would change not only his life, but the lives of 3 little girls who'd already taught him more about courage than 20 years in corporate America ever had. The rain outside had finally stopped, but Marcus knew the storm in his own life was just beginning. Marcus sat in his Bentley outside the Sunshine Cafe at 2:47 a.m., watching through the rain-streaked windows as Jerry helped the 3 girls into a corner booth. The 24-hour diner was nearly empty, except for a few truck drivers and late-night workers, its fluorescent lighting creating a warm island in the darkness of downtown Seattle. His phone had been buzzing constantly for the past hour as he made call after call, trying to navigate a system he'd never had reason to understand. The first call had been to his personal attorney, David Chen, who'd groggily explained the complexities of child welfare law. The second was to Patricia Valdez, Davidson Industries' head of corporate social responsibility, who'd provided him with contacts at various children's organizations, but it was the third call that had shaken him most. "Mr. Davidson, I appreciate your concern," Dr. Amanda Foster from Child Protective Services had said, her voice professional but weary. "But emergency placements at this hour are extremely limited. 3 siblings together? That's nearly impossible. We have individual foster homes available, but keeping them together would require a specialized facility, and frankly, we don't have one with immediate openings." "What if money wasn't an object?" Marcus had pressed. "I could fund whatever's needed," Dr. Foster had sighed. "It's not just about funding, sir. It's about licensed facilities, background check caregivers, proper protocols. Even with unlimited resources, we're looking at weeks or months to arrange something suitable. In the meantime, the children would need temporary placement. Separated? Most likely, yes." Now, staring at the 3 girls through the diner window as they shared a plate of pancakes, the first hot meal they'd had in days, Marcus felt the full weight of their impossible situation settling on his shoulders. Emma was carefully dividing the food into equal portions for her sisters, while Chloe colored on a paper placemat Jerry had found for her. Sophia sat quietly, still clutching that family photograph. Marcus's phone rang again. This time it was Carol Hutchinson, Jerry's wife, calling from their home, where she'd been researching options since Jerry had woken her with news of the situation. "Mr. Davidson, I've been making calls to every contact I have in child services," Carol said, her grandmother's heart evident in her voice. "The situation is worse than we thought. There are currently 127 children on the waiting list for foster placement in King County alone. 3 siblings together? The caseworker I spoke with said it could be 6 months or more." "6 months," Marcus repeated, the number hitting him like a physical blow. "And that's assuming everything goes smoothly." "With no complications," Carol continued. "Mr. Davidson, I've volunteered with children for 15 years. These babies have been through more trauma than most adults. They need stability, continuity, love. The system isn't equipped to provide that, especially not quickly." After hanging up, Marcus made another call, this one to his private investigator, Lauren Mitchell, who'd handled background checks for sensitive corporate acquisitions. If he was going to help these children, he needed to understand exactly what they'd been through and what resources might be available. "Lauren, I need you to research a family. Last name Patterson, parents deceased, 3 daughters, triplets, age 7. I need everything. Medical records, financial situation, extended family, anything that might help me understand their circumstances." "This is unusual for you, Marcus," Lauren observed. They'd worked together for 8 years, and she'd never known him to take personal interest in anything unrelated to business. "Is this connected to a Davidson Industries matter?" "No," Marcus said simply. "This is personal." 2 hours later, Lauren called back with information that made Marcus's chest tighten with anger and sadness. "Michael Patterson, age 32, died 18 months ago from pancreatic cancer," Lauren reported. "He was a junior high science teacher with no life insurance. The family lost their house 6 months after his death. Sarah Patterson, age 29, worked 3 part-time jobs trying to keep the family afloat while battling breast cancer. She died 4 weeks ago at Seattle General Hospital." Marcus closed his eyes, imagining what those final months must have been like for Sarah Patterson. Watching her husband die, fighting her own battle with cancer, trying to work multiple jobs to support 3 young daughters, losing their home, knowing she was dying and would leave her children with nothing. "There's more," Lauren continued. "The girls were staying with a neighbor, Maria Rodriguez, after their mother's death. But Mrs. Rodriguez lost her apartment last week when the building was sold for redevelopment. She moved in with relatives in California and couldn't take the girls with her. What about other family?" Michael Patterson was estranged from his family in Ohio. There was some kind of falling out years ago. I'm still investigating the details. Sarah Patterson was an only child. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 25. Marcus absorbed this information, each detail adding to the picture of three little girls who'd lost everything through no fault of their own. No family support system, no financial resources, no safety net of any kind. Lauren, I need you to find out about the building sale that displaced Mrs. Rodriguez. Get me the name of the developer. 20 minutes later, Lauren called back with news that hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Marcus, you're not going to like this. The apartment building was purchased last month by Meridian Development Group. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Meridian Development was a subsidiary of Davidson Industries, one of several real estate investment arms he'd created to diversify the company's portfolio. He personally approved all major acquisitions, though he rarely paid attention to the human impact of the developments. Are you telling me that my company is responsible for these children being homeless? Indirectly, yes. The building was purchased as part of a gentrification project. 64 low-income families were displaced to make way for luxury condominiums. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the irony of the situation washing over him. He'd spent the last several hours trying to figure out how to help 3 orphaned children, only to discover that his own business practices had contributed to their homelessness. The corporate machine he'd built had crushed not just his competitors, but innocent families trying to survive. He thought about all the development projects he'd approved over the years, the neighborhoods he'd transformed, the inefficient housing he'd replaced with more profitable ventures. How many families had been displaced? How many children had been affected by his relentless pursuit of profit? Through the diner window, he watched Emma helping Sophia with a puzzle book Jerry had bought from the gas station next door. 3 little girls who should have been asleep in their own beds, in their own home, with their own parents. Instead, they were spending the night in a 24-hour diner because every adult who should have protected them had failed, including indirectly him. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Jerry. Girls are getting tired. Carol is on her way with some clothes and blankets. What's the plan for tonight? That was the question Marcus had been avoiding. What was the plan? He could get them a hotel room, but children couldn't stay alone. He could hire a caregiver, but that would take time he didn't have. He could call social services and let the system handle it, but that meant certain separation and an uncertain future. Or he could do something that violated every principle of his carefully controlled life. Marcus got out of his car and walked into the diner. The girls looked up as he approached their booth, and he saw something in their eyes he hadn't noticed before. Hope. Despite everything they'd been through, they still had the capacity to hope that an adult might actually follow through on a promise to help. How are you feeling? He asked, sliding into the booth across from them. The pancakes were really good, Chloe said shyly. Thank you. Jerry said you're going to help us stay together, Emma added, studying his face intently. Is that true? Marcus looked at these 3 little girls who'd already faced more hardship than most adults ever would. They'd lost their parents, their home, their entire world, yet they still took care of each other with a fierceness that reminded him of everything he'd forgotten about what really mattered in life. Yes, he said, making a decision that would change everything. That's true, but I need to ask you something important. Would you be willing to come stay at my house tonight? Just until we can figure out a better plan. The girls exchanged their silent conversation again. Finally, Emma spoke for all of them. Together? Together? Marcus confirmed. And you won't call the people who want to separate us? Marcus hesitated, knowing he was making promises he might not be able to keep. I'll do everything in my power to make sure you stay together. Sophia, who had been quietly listening, suddenly looked up at him with those wise, sad eyes. Are you sure you want us? We're a lot of trouble. Mummy used to say that 3 of everything costs 3 times as much. The innocent question broke Marcus's heart. These children had been made to feel like burdens, like their very existence was a problem to be solved rather than lives to be cherished. You're not trouble, Marcus said firmly. You're 3 little girls who deserve to be safe and loved and protected, and that's exactly what's going to happen. As Carol Hutchinson arrived with bags of children's clothes and supplies she'd hastily gathered from her own grandchildren's closets, Marcus realized he was about to embark on the most important project of his life. One with no business plan, no guaranteed outcome, and no clear path to success. But looking at Emma, Chloe, and Sophia as they gathered their few possessions and prepared to trust him with their lives, Marcus knew that some things were worth the risk, even if the return on investment couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The ride to Marcus's penthouse was quiet except for the soft hum of the Bentley's engine and the occasional whispered conversation between the triplets in the back seat. Carol Hutchinson had insisted on following them in her own car, unwilling to let the girls face another transition alone. As they pulled into the underground garage of the luxury high-rise, Marcus caught Emma's wide-eyed expression in the rearview mirror. "You live here?" Chloe asked, her voice filled with wonder as they stepped into the marble-floored lobby with its crystal chandeliers and modern art installations. "The top floor," Marcus confirmed, suddenly seeing his home through their eyes. The opulence that had always made him feel successful now seemed excessive, almost embarrassing in the face of their recent homelessness. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. Sophia pressed close to her sisters, still clutching the family photograph, while Emma maintained her protective stance despite her obvious exhaustion. Marcus found himself nervous in a way he'd never experienced before corporate presentations or hostile takeovers. 3 7-year-olds were about to judge his living space, and somehow their opinion mattered more than any board of directors. The penthouse doors opened to reveal 5,000 square feet of minimalist luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, Italian leather furniture arranged with geometric precision, and not a single item out of place. The space was beautiful, impressive, and utterly cold. "Wow," Emma breathed, stepping cautiously onto the polished hardwood floors. "It's like a museum." Carol Hutchinson, who had never seen Marcus's home before, let out a low whistle. "Mr. Davidson, this is remarkable." But as Marcus watched the girls take in their surroundings, he noticed something troubling. They stayed close together near the entrance, afraid to touch anything, overwhelmed by the sterile perfection of it all. This wasn't a home where children could feel comfortable. It was a showcase of wealth that emphasized how different their worlds were. "Are we allowed to sit on the furniture?" Sophia asked quietly. "Of course," Marcus said quickly. This is your home now, for as long as you need it." The words surprised him even as he spoke them. When had he decided this arrangement was anything more than temporary? But looking at these 3 little girls who'd lost everything, he realized that somewhere between the parking garage and this moment, his entire perspective had shifted. Carol helped the girls settle on the large sectional sofa, and Marcus went to the kitchen to make hot chocolate, something he'd never done in his own home. As he fumbled with the cocoa powder, he overheard Emma whispering to her sisters. "Remember what Daddy used to say about rich people?" Emma's voice carried across the open floor plan. "He said they got rich by not caring about other people." Marcus froze, the words hitting him like a physical blow. Through the kitchen opening, he could see the girls huddled together, and he realized they were discussing him in the way children do when they think adults can't hear them. "But this man seems different," Chloe whispered back. He bought us food and brought us here. Daddy also said actions matter more than words, Emma replied, with the wisdom of someone forced to grow up too fast. We have to wait and see what he does. Marcus continued preparing the hot chocolate with trembling hands, their innocent conversation cutting deeper than any corporate criticism ever had. Michael Patterson, their late father, had apparently held strong opinions about wealthy people, and if Marcus was honest with himself, those opinions probably weren't wrong. Carol approached the kitchen counter, having overheard the same conversation. "Children that age are remarkably perceptive," she said quietly. "They've learned to protect themselves by observing adult behavior very carefully." "What their father said about rich people," Marcus murmured. "He wasn't wrong, was he?" Carol studied him thoughtfully. "Maybe not about most. But you're here at 4 a.m. making hot chocolate for 3 homeless children instead of sleeping in your comfortable bed. That suggests he might have been wrong about you." As Marcus served the hot chocolate, complete with marshmallows that Carol had thoughtfully brought, his phone rang. Lauren Mitchell's name appeared on the display. "I need to take this," Marcus told the girls. "It's about your family." He stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air helping to clear his head. "What did you find, Lauren?" "More than you're going to want to hear," Lauren replied grimly. "I dug deeper into the Patterson family history, and there's something you need to know about Michael Patterson's estrangement from his family in Ohio." Marcus braced himself. "Tell me." Michael Patterson wasn't just estranged from his family. He was specifically estranged from his brother Robert, who happens to be a successful businessman in Columbus. But here's the kicker. Robert Patterson tried to reconnect after Michael's cancer diagnosis. He offered to help financially, even suggested the family move to Ohio where he could support them. What happened? Michael refused. According to the neighbor I interviewed, he was adamant that he didn't want his brother's dirty money. Apparently, Robert made his fortune in real estate development, specifically by buying up low-income housing and converting into luxury properties. Sound familiar? Marcus felt sick, just like Meridian Development. Exactly. Michael Patterson apparently saw his brother as everything wrong with capitalism, someone who got rich by displacing poor families. He'd rather struggle and die than accept help from someone he viewed as morally corrupt. The irony was devastating. Marcus realized he was looking at a mirror image of his own relationship with his brother Nathan. 2 sets of brothers, divided by different values and life choices. But while Marcus had simply grown apart from Nathan through neglect and ambition, Michael Patterson had actively rejected his brother's help because of moral objections to how that wealth was accumulated. "There's more," Lauren continued. "I contacted Robert Patterson directly. He's been trying to find his nieces since Sarah died. He hired his own investigator, but they've been looking in the wrong places. He had no idea the girls were in Seattle." Marcus gripped the balcony railing. "Does he want custody?" "He's desperate for it. He and his wife never had children of their own. They've been approved for adoption and have the resources to provide everything the girls need, but Marcus..." Lauren paused. "There's something else, something that's going to change everything." "What?" "I found Sarah Patterson's medical records. She didn't just die from cancer. She died from complications related to delayed treatment. She postponed her own chemotherapy sessions multiple times because she couldn't afford childcare for the girls while she was at the hospital." The revelation hit Marcus like a tsunami. Sarah Patterson had literally died because she couldn't afford basic support services, the same kind of support that Marcus spent more on wine in a month than she earned in a year. "How much would childcare have cost?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "About $15 an hour, 3 times a week for 6 months, roughly $3,000 total." $3,000. Marcus spent more than that on a single dinner at high-end restaurants. Sarah Patterson had died for want of an amount of money he wouldn't notice missing from his account. "Lauren," I need you to find Robert Patterson's contact information, but don't tell him where the girls are yet. I need to think about this." After hanging up, Marcus stood on the balcony looking out at the city lights, each one representing someone's life, someone's struggle, someone's dreams. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of his wealth and the responsibility that came with it. When he returned inside, he found the three girls curled up together on the sofa, finally asleep. Carol was covering them with blankets she'd brought from her own home. "They're beautiful children," Carol whispered, "but they're exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. They need time to heal." Marcus watched the sleeping girls, noting how even in sleep they stayed protectively close to each other. Emma's arm was draped over both her sisters, and Sophia still clutched that family photograph. "Carol, what if I told you these girls have family in Ohio? An uncle who wants them and has the resources to care for them properly." Carol looked up sharply. "Do they know about this uncle? Their father cut off contact years ago. The girls probably don't even remember him." Carol sat down heavily in a chair. "That complicates things significantly. Legally, family placement is always preferred. But emotionally..." She looked at the sleeping triplets. "These children have been through enough upheaval. They need stability, familiar faces, people they trust. But what's best for them long term? A uncle who can provide everything they need, or a stranger who found them in a parking garage?" "Mr. Davidson," Carol said gently, "you're asking the wrong question. It's not about what's most convenient or even what looks best on paper. It's about what will help these children heal and thrive. And right now they trust you. They chose to come here with you when they could have refused." As if to emphasize Carol's point, Sophia stirred in her sleep, murmuring, "Daddy, don't leave us." Again, the heartbreaking words hung in the air, a reminder of how much these children had already lost. Marcus realized he was facing the most important decision of his life, one that would determine not just the girls' future, but his own understanding of what it meant to be truly wealthy. The city continued to glitter beyond the windows, but Marcus no longer saw it as his kingdom to conquer. Instead, he saw it as a place where three little girls needed to find their way home, and he was the only one standing between them and another devastating loss. The truth was more complex than he'd imagined, and the choice ahead would test everything. He thought he knew about love, responsibility, and what it really meant to be rich. Dawn broke over Seattle with reluctant grey light filtering through the penthouse windows. Marcus had spent the night in his home office, unable to sleep, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents that now seemed meaningless compared to the three children sleeping on his sofa. At 6:30 a.m., his phone rang with a call that would force him to confront the darkest aspects of his business empire. "Mr. Davidson, this is Robert Patterson calling from Columbus, Ohio." The voice was strained, desperate. "I believe you may have information about my nieces." Marcus's blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" "Your investigator, Lauren Mitchell, contacted me yesterday. She said you'd found Emma, Chloe, and..." "Sophia, please, I've been searching for them for weeks. I just need to know they're safe." Marcus could hear the genuine anguish in Robert's voice, the same desperation he'd felt when he first saw the girls in the parking garage. "They're safe," he said quietly. "They're with me." Thank God. Robert's relief was palpable. "I've been going out of my mind. When Sarah died and the girls disappeared, I thought I'd lost my last connection to Michael forever." The mention of Michael Patterson made Marcus's stomach twist. "Mr. Patterson, I understand you and your brother were estranged." A long pause. "That's one way to put it. Michael hated everything about my business, my lifestyle, my values. He saw me as everything wrong with American capitalism." Robert's voice grew bitter. And maybe he was right. Marcus walked to the window, looking down at the city where thousands of people were beginning their morning commutes, unaware that their lives were shaped by decisions made in boardrooms like his. Tell me about your business. I've built a real estate empire by buying distressed properties and renovating them. Low-income housing, mostly. I tell myself I'm improving neighborhoods, but the truth is, I'm displacing families who can't afford the upgraded rents. Robert's confession was raw, unfiltered. Michael used to say I was getting rich off other people's misery. The parallel to Marcus's own Meridian development was unmistakable, but hearing it from Robert's perspective added a layer of self-awareness that Marcus had never allowed himself to experience. When Michael got sick, Robert continued, I tried to help. I offered to pay for his treatment, to move the family to Ohio, to set up a trust fund for the girls. He refused everything, said he'd rather die poor than live off blood money. Marcus felt the weight of those words. Blood money. His exact phrase. He said that every dollar I'd made came from someone else's suffering, and he wouldn't let his daughters benefit from it. Robert's voice broke. So I watched my brother die from a distance, knowing I could have saved him if he'd just let me help. The tragedy of the Patterson brothers was a mirror reflecting Marcus's own fractured relationship with Nathan. But where? Marcus had simply grown distant from his brother through neglect and ambition. Michael had actively rejected Robert's help due to moral objections and died because of it. Mr. Patterson, Marcus said carefully, I need to ask you something. If Michael felt so strongly about your money being tainted, how do you think he'd feel about you raising his daughters? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been asking myself that same question every day since Sarah died. Would Michael want me to raise his girls, or would he see it as the ultimate betrayal? Marcus heard movement in the living room. The girls were waking up. Through the office doorway, he could see Emma helping her sisters fold the blankets Carol had provided, their natural courtesy evident even in their confusion about their new surroundings. Mr. Patterson, I need to be completely honest with you. Your nieces have been through hell. They've been living on the streets and they're traumatized. They need stability, not another upheaval. I can provide stability, Robert said quickly. I have a house, resources. My wife Ellen and I have been approved for adoption. We can give them everything they need. Can you give them what they want? Marcus asked. They're terrified of being separated. They've been each other's only constant through losing both parents and their home. Of course they'd stay together. We'd never split them up. Marcus watched as Sophia approached his office door, still clutching her family photograph. She knocked softly, and when he gestured for her to enter, she climbed into the chair across from his desk with the solemnity of a business meeting. Are you talking about us? She asked directly, her large eyes missing. Nothing. Marcus covered the phone. Yes, sweetheart, I'm talking to someone who wants to help you and your sisters. Another person who wants to separate us? No, this person wants to keep you together. He's your daddy's brother. Sophia's eyes widened. Uncle Robert? But Daddy said Uncle Robert was mean and only cared about money. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Even at 7, Sophia remembered her father's judgment of his brother. He uncovered the phone. Mr. Patterson, I think you need to understand something. Your brother made sure his daughters knew exactly how he felt about you. They remember you as the uncle who only cared about money. The silence on the other end was deafening. Let me talk to them, Robert finally said. Please. I need them to. No, that's not who I am anymore. That's not my decision to make, Marcus replied. But I think you need to understand what you're asking. These girls have lost everyone they've ever loved. They've learned to be suspicious of adults, especially wealthy ones. They're not going to trust you just because you're family. At that moment, Emma and Chloe appeared in the doorway, drawn by the serious conversation. Emma, ever the protector, immediately moved to stand beside Sophia's chair. Is someone trying to take us away? Emma asked, her voice carrying the steel. that had kept her sisters alive on the streets. Marcus looked at these three little girls who had somehow become the center of his world in less than 12 hours. They deserved the truth, even if it was complicated. Your Uncle Robert in Ohio wants to take care of you. He's been looking for you since your mommy died. The Uncle Daddy didn't like? Chloe asked quietly. Yes, but people can change. Your uncle says he's different now. Emma's expression was skeptical beyond her years. That's what adults always say when they want something. Marcus realized he was witnessing the tragic result of too many broken promises, too many adults who had failed these children. Their father's principled stand against his brother's wealth had left them not just poor, but suspicious of anyone who might help them. Mr. Patterson, Marcus said into the phone, I'm going to put you on speaker. You can talk to your nieces, but I won't force them to go with you if they don't want to. He pressed the speaker button, and Robert's voice filled the office. Emma? Chloe? Sophia? This is your Uncle Robert. I know you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. You were 4 years old the last time I saw you at your grandma's funeral. The girls exchanged glances, and Marcus could see them trying to access memories from when they were very young. I know your daddy told you I wasn't a good person. Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion. And you know what? He was right. I was so focused on making money that I forgot about family, about people, about what really mattered. But losing your daddy, and then your mommy, it changed me. Sophia leaned forward. Did you love our daddy? More than anything in the world. He was my little brother, and I failed him. I was so proud, so stubborn, that I let him die rather than find a way to help him that he could accept. That's a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life. Marcus watched the girls process this confession. Even at 7, they could hear the genuine remorse in their uncle's voice. If you loved Daddy, why didn't you help him when he was sick? Emma asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Because I was trying to help him the wrong way. I kept offering him money, but what he really needed was for me to change who I was. He needed me to be the kind of person he could respect. Again, Robert's voice broke. I spent so many years building a business that hurt people just like the man who's been taking care of you. We both made our money by displacing families, by caring more about profit than people. Your daddy was right to hate that. Marcus felt exposed, knowing that Robert was describing his own business model with painful accuracy. But Robert wasn't finished. But here's what I learned too late. Having money isn't what makes you a bad person. It's how you use it. Your daddy was so afraid of dirty money that he wouldn't let me help him, even when he was dying. He chose to die poor rather than compromise his principles. Was Daddy wrong? Sophia asked quietly. Your daddy was the most principled man I ever knew, but maybe he was wrong about one thing. Maybe money isn't automatically dirty if you use it to help people instead of hurt them. Marcus looked at the 3 girls, seeing them grapple with concepts that most adults struggled to understand. Their father had raised them to be suspicious of wealth, but their current circumstances were forcing them to depend on it for survival. I want to come to Seattle, Robert said. I want to meet you in person, to show you that I'm different now, but I won't force you to come with me. That's a choice you get to make. Emma, Chloe, and Sophia looked at each other, having another of their silent conversations. Finally, Emma spoke for all of them. We want to meet you, but we're not leaving Marcus. He found us when nobody else was looking. Marcus felt his heart swell with an emotion he'd never experienced before. The feeling of being truly needed, not for his wealth or power, but for himself. That's fair, Robert said. Maybe we can all figure this out together. As the call ended, Marcus realized that confronting the past wasn't just about understanding the Patterson family's tragedy. It was about facing his own moral reckoning and deciding what kind of man he wanted to be going forward. The 3 little girls who had found their way into his life were about to teach him that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in boardrooms, but in the human heart. 3 days after the phone call with Robert Patterson, Marcus's carefully constructed plan to ease the girls into a new normal came crashing down at 2:15 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. He was in the middle of a board meeting when his assistant Sarah burst through the conference room doors, her face pale with panic. "Mr. Davidson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an emergency. Child Protective Services is at your penthouse right now, and they have a court order." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Around the mahogany table, 12 board members stared at him in confusion as he gathered his papers with trembling hands. "What kind of court order?" "Emergency custody removal. Someone reported that you're housing 3 minor children without proper authorization." The drive from downtown to his building felt like an eternity, Marcus's mind racing through possibilities. Who had reported him? How had CPS found out? The girls had been staying with him for 3 days, and he'd been careful to keep their presence private while he worked with lawyers to formalize a temporary guardianship arrangement. His phone rang constantly, Robert Patterson calling from the airport, having flown in that morning for their planned meeting. Carol Hutchinson asking if she could help. His attorney David Chen requesting immediate consultation. Marcus ignored them all, focused only on reaching Emma, Chloe, and Sophia before they disappeared into a system that would tear them apart. The scene in his penthouse lobby was worse than he'd imagined. 2 CPS caseworkers flanked by a police officer were questioning Jerry Hutchinson, who had apparently been trying to prevent them from going upstairs. A small crowd of residents had gathered, their whispered conversations creating a buzz of speculation and judgment. Mr. Davidson, the lead caseworker, a stern woman in her 50s named Margaret Thornton, approached him with official documents. "I'm here regarding the 3 minor children in your custody. We need to discuss their immediate placement." "Where are they?" Marcus demanded, his usual corporate composure abandoned. "Upstairs with my colleague, Ms. Rodriguez. They're safe. But we need to resolve this situation immediately." Marcus scanned the court order, his lawyer's training helping him parse the legal language despite his emotional state. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that he was an unfit guardian, citing his lack of experience with children, his unmarried status, and most damaging of all, allegations that he had questionable motives for taking in 3 young girls. "Who filed this complaint?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that, but I can tell you it came from someone claiming to have the children's best interests at heart." The elevator ride to his penthouse felt like ascending to his own execution. Marcus could hear voices through his front door, official, professional voices explaining procedures to 3 little girls who had already endured more than enough official procedures in their short lives. When he entered, he found Emma, Chloe, and Sophia sitting together on his sofa, their few possessions packed in the same worn backpack they'd carried in the parking garage. They looked up at him with expressions that broke his heart, not surprise or fear, but resignation. They had learned to expect abandonment. "Are we in trouble?" Sophia asked quietly. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble." Marcus sat down across from them, ignoring the CPS worker who was documenting everything. "There's been a misunderstanding, and some people think it would be better if you stayed somewhere else for a while. We told them we want to stay with you," Emma said, her young voice carrying the authority of someone who had become an expert at advocating for herself and her sisters. "But they said it's not up to us." The second caseworker, Maria Rodriguez, was a younger woman whose eyes showed genuine compassion even as she performed her official duties. "Mr. Davidson, we understand your intentions were good, but housing minor children without proper legal guardianship opens both you and them to serious risks." "I have lawyers working on the guardianship paperwork," Marcus protested. We were going to file everything this week. Unfortunately, we can't wait for paperwork. We have reports suggesting that your motives may not be entirely pure. The implication hit Marcus like a slap. Someone had suggested he was a predator, that his care for these children was somehow inappropriate. The accusation was so far from the truth that he struggled to even comprehend it. Who would say such a thing? He asked, though the answer became clear when Margaret Thornton's phone rang. Yes, he's here now, she said into the phone. No, sir, we haven't moved them yet. I understand your concerns. She covered the phone and looked at Marcus. There's someone here who claims to be the children's legal guardian. The front door opened, and Robert Patterson walked in, followed by a woman Marcus assumed was his wife Ellen. But instead of the emotional family reunion Marcus had expected, Robert's face was hard with anger and determination. Girls, Robert said, his voice carefully controlled. I'm your Uncle Robert. I'm here to take you home. Emma instinctively moved closer to her sisters. We don't want to go. We want to stay with Marcus. I know this is confusing, Robert said, his tone softening as he looked at his nieces. But I'm your family. I have legal rights, and I can provide for you properly. Marcus realized with dawning horror what had happened. Robert Patterson had filed the complaint against him. The desperate phone calls, the expressions of gratitude, the promises of cooperation, all of it had been a manipulation designed to locate the girls so he could claim them legally. You reported me to CPS, Marcus said, the betrayal cutting deeper than any business double-cross he'd ever experienced. Robert's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary to protect my brother's children. A bachelor millionaire taking in 3 young girls. How do you think that looks? I couldn't let you destroy their reputations or put them at risk. At risk? Marcus's voice rose. They were sleeping in a parking garage when I found them. Because I didn't know where they were, Robert shot back. If you had contacted me immediately instead of playing house with children who aren't yours, we could have avoided all of this. The argument was escalating in front of 3 traumatized children who were watching the adults in their lives fight over them like property. Chloe began to cry silently, and Sophia clutched her family photograph so tightly her knuckles turned white. Stop, Emma said, her voice cutting through the adult argument with surprising authority. Just stop fighting about us like we're not here. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to a 7-year-old girl who had somehow become the most mature person present. Uncle Robert, Emma continued, if you're our daddy's brother, then you know what Daddy always said about family. Robert knelt down to her level. What did he say? He said, family isn't about blood or money or who has legal papers. Family is about who shows up when you need them most. Emma's voice carried the weight of her father's teachings. Marcus showed up. You didn't. The simple truth devastated Robert. Marcus could see the man's carefully constructed justifications crumbling in the face of his niece's honest assessment. I've been looking for you, Robert said weakly. But you weren't there when Mommy died, Chloe added, her tears still flowing. You weren't there when we were scared and hungry and sleeping outside. I didn't know. Marcus knew, Sophia interrupted, speaking for the first time since Robert's arrival. Marcus found us and fed us and made us feel safe. Why do you want to take us away from someone who helped us? Margaret Thornton cleared her throat. Mr. Davidson, regardless of your good intentions, the law is clear. Biological family takes precedence, especially when they can provide proper care. But they don't want to go, Marcus said desperately. Doesn't their preference matter? They're 7 years old, Robert said, trying to assert his authority. They don't understand what's best for them long term. We understand more than you think, Emma replied, her father's fierce independence shining through. We understand that you let Daddy die rather than help him. We understand that you only want us now because we don't have anywhere else to go. And we understand that Marcus cared about us when he didn't have to. The room fell silent except for the sound of Chloe's quiet sobbing. Marcus felt helpless, watching these three brave little girls face another devastating loss. The system was designed to protect children, but in this case it was about to traumatize them further by separating them from the only stability they'd found. "There has to be another way," Marcus said to the caseworkers, "some kind of compromise that puts the children's emotional well-being first." Margaret Thornton looked uncomfortable, clearly torn between following protocol and recognizing the obvious distress of the children. "Mr. Davidson, if you truly care about these girls, you'll understand that they need proper family placement." "I am their family," Robert insisted. "I'm their blood relative with legal standing." "You're a stranger," Emma said flatly. "Family doesn't abandon each other." The crisis had reached its peak. In the next few minutes, a decision would be made that would determine not only the girls' immediate future, but whether they would ever trust adults again. Marcus realized that everything he'd learned about wealth, power, and influence meant nothing if he couldn't protect three children who had somehow become the most important people in his world. The choice before him was stark: accept defeat and watch the girls be taken by a relative they didn't trust, or fight a system that held all the legal cards. Either way, Emma, Chloe, and Sophia would pay the price for the failures of every adult who was supposed to protect them. As Marcus looked into their eyes, so young yet already marked by too much loss, he knew that his next decision would define not just their future, but the kind of man he chose to be when everything was on the line. Marcus Davidson stood in his penthouse living room, surrounded by social workers, police officers, and legal documents, watching three 7-year-old girls who had fundamentally changed his understanding of what it meant to be powerful. In that moment of crisis, with everything he thought he knew about control and influence rendered useless, Marcus made a decision that would transform not just his life, but his entire approach to wealth and responsibility. "Stop," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension with quiet authority. "Everyone just stop for a moment." Margaret Thornton looked up from her paperwork, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Mr. Davidson, we have procedures to follow." "I know about procedures," Marcus interrupted, his years of corporate leadership finally finding their proper purpose. "I've spent my entire career following procedures, optimizing systems, maximizing efficiency. But what I've learned in the past 4 days is that some things are more important than procedures." He walked over to where the girls sat, huddled together on his sofa, their small faces reflecting a mixture of hope and resignation. Kneeling down to their level, Marcus addressed them directly, ignoring the adults whose authority suddenly seemed less important than 3 children's emotional well-being. "Emma, Chloe, Sophia, I need you to know something. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I'm not giving up on you. I'm not walking away. I don't care how many lawyers I have to hire, how many courts I have to petition, or how much money I have to spend. You are not going to be separated, and you are not going to be placed somewhere you don't want to be." Emma studied his face with that piercing intensity that reminded him so much of her father's principled determination. "You promise?" "I promise," Marcus said. And in making that commitment, he felt something shift fundamentally inside himself. "But I need you to trust me to do this the right way." Robert Patterson stepped forward, his frustration evident. "You can't just override the legal system because you've gotten emotionally attached to these children. I have rights." "Rights?" Marcus stood and turned to face Robert, his voice carrying the cold precision that had intimidated countless business rivals. "Let me tell you about rights, Mr. Patterson. You have the right to claim these children because you share DNA with them. But these girls have rights too, the right to feel safe, the right to stay together, and the right to have their voices heard in decisions that affect their lives." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized years ago, but never thought he'd use in a situation like this. "Nathan, it's Marcus. I need you to come to Seattle immediately and bring Jennifer and the kids." "Yes, I know it's Wednesday. Yes, I know you have school. This is more important than school." Margaret Thornton frowned. "Mr. Davidson, involving more people isn't going to change the legal situation." "Actually, it might," Marcus replied, ending the call with his brother. "Ms. Thornton, what if I told you that I'm prepared to undergo whatever screening, training, or certification is required to become a licensed foster parent? What if I told you that I have family support, financial stability, and the unanimous preference of the children involved?" "The process takes months," she replied. "We can't leave the children in an unlicensed placement while—" "Then license me today," Marcus interrupted. "Emergency placements happen all the time. You have the authority to approve temporary arrangements when they're in the children's best interest." Robert's wife, Ellen, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. "Robert, maybe we should listen to what the girls want." "Ellen, we've discussed this." "No, you've discussed this," Ellen said firmly. "I've been watching these children for the past hour, and they're terrified of us. They don't know us. They don't trust us. And frankly, after seeing how you manipulated the situation to get them here, I'm not sure I trust us either." The admission from Robert's own wife shifted the dynamic in the room. Marcus seized the opportunity, addressing Maria Rodriguez, the younger caseworker who had shown more compassion throughout the process. "Ms. Rodriguez, you have children, don't you? I can see it in the way you interact with Emma, Chloe, and Sophia." Maria nodded reluctantly. "2 daughters, ages 8 and 10. Then you understand that sometimes the best thing for children isn't what looks right on paper, but what feels right in their hearts. These girls have been through more trauma in the past month than most people experience in a lifetime. They've found stability, safety, and trust with me. Isn't preserving that worth more than following standard procedure?" Before Maria could answer, Marcus's phone rang. It was his attorney, David Chen, calling from the courthouse where he'd been filing emergency motions since Sarah's call that afternoon. "Marcus, I've got good news and bad news," David said on speakerphone. "The good news is that I've found a judge willing to hear an emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Judge Patricia Williams deals with family court, and she's known for prioritizing children's welfare over bureaucratic convenience." "What's the bad news?" "The hearing is in 90 minutes, and she wants to interview the children directly. All parties need to be present, including Mr. Patterson." Margaret Thornton looked at her watch, clearly calculating the complications this development would create. "Mr. Davidson, even if a judge grants temporary guardianship, Mr. Patterson still has superior legal standing as a blood relative." "Not if he voluntarily relinquishes his claim," Marcus said, turning to Robert with an expression that mixed challenge with compassion. "Robert, you said you loved your brother. You said you regretted not being able to help him when he was alive. Here's your chance to honor Michael's memory by doing what he would have wanted, putting his daughter's well-being ahead of your own desires." Robert's face contorted with conflicting emotions. "You think Michael would have wanted his children raised by someone like you? A corporate raider who built his fortune the same way I did. Maybe not the man I was last week," Marcus admitted, "but hopefully the man I'm becoming because of them." Sophia, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, suddenly stood up and walked over to Robert. In her small hands, she held the worn family photograph that had been her constant companion through their homelessness. "Uncle Robert," she said softly, "do you want to see our family?" Robert knelt down as Sophia showed him the picture. Michael and Sarah Patterson with their 3 identical daughters, all of them smiling in front of their modest home. "Daddy used to tell us stories about when you were little," Sophia continued. "He said you used to protect him from bullies at school. He said you were the best big brother ever before you forgot how to be family. Robert's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the photograph of the brother he'd lost and the nieces he'd never really known. "He talked about me?" Robert asked quietly. "All the time," Emma said, joining her. "Sister, he said he missed you, but he was too proud to call. Mommy said pride was Daddy's biggest weakness." Chloe approached cautiously, completing the circle around their uncle. "He said you taught him how to ride a bike and how to throw a curveball. He kept your baseball card collection even after you stopped talking." The revelation that Michael had cherished memories of their childhood despite their adult estrangement broke something loose in Robert's heart. Ellen put her hand on her husband's shoulder, and Marcus could see her whispering something about doing what was right for the children, not what was easy for them. "If I step aside," Robert said slowly, "how do I know you won't disappear from their lives the way I disappeared from Michael's?" Marcus looked at the three girls who had somehow become the center of his universe in less than a week. "Because they've taught me something I never learned in 20 years of business success, that real wealth isn't measured in dollars or assets. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people who trust you, and the legacy you leave behind." He turned to face everyone in the room, the social workers, the police officer, Robert and Ellen, and most importantly, Emma, Chloe, and Sophia. "I'm not just committing to these three girls," Marcus announced. "I'm committing to changing everything. About how I do business, how I use my wealth, and how I define success. The company that displaced their neighbor, the development practices that contributed to their homelessness, the entire system that values profit over people. I'm going to tear it all down and rebuild it based on what I've learned from 3 7-year-olds who understand family better than most adults." Margaret Thornton looked skeptical. "Mr. Davidson, making grand promises in an emotional moment isn't a promise," Marcus interrupted. "It's a commitment backed by action. Maria, I want you to personally oversee my licensing process. Robert, I want you and Ellen to be part of the girls' lives, but as their uncle and aunt, not their guardians. And girls," he looked at Emma, Chloe, and Sophia, "I want you to help me figure out how to use my money to make sure no other children have to sleep in parking garages or lose their families to poverty." Emma stepped forward and took Marcus's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with surprising strength. "Daddy always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to become the person they believed you could be." As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Marcus realized that the past week hadn't just been about saving 3 children from homelessness. It had been about saving himself from a life of empty success and meaningless achievement. The real transformation was just beginning. But for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Davidson knew exactly what kind of man he wanted to become. 6 weeks after the courthouse hearing that had granted Marcus emergency guardianship, the Davidson Industries boardroom looked like a war zone. Financial reports lay scattered across the mahogany table, architects' blueprints covered the walls, and Marcus stood before 12 increasingly agitated board members, announcing the most radical corporate restructuring in the company's history. "Takutsun, want to do what?" Board Chairman William Hartwell's voice rose an octave as he stared at the presentation slides. "Convert 60% of our real estate holdings into affordable housing. Marcus, have you lost your mind?" "On the contrary," Marcus replied calmly, clicking to the next slide, which showed projected community impact statistics. "I've found it. For the first time in 20 years, I'm making business decisions based on something other than pure profit margins." The resistance had been building for weeks, ever since Marcus had announced his intention to transform Davidson Industries from a profit-maximizing corporation into what he called a community-first enterprise. The board members, who had grown wealthy alongside Marcus's ruthless business practices, were not pleased with his sudden attack of conscience. "The shareholders will revolt," warned Dorothy Chen, the company's CFO. "Our stock price has already dropped 15% since news of your domestic situation became public." Marcus felt a familiar surge of anger at the euphemism. "My domestic situation? You mean 3 orphan children who needed help?" "You know what I mean," Dorothy replied stiffly. "Investors are concerned about your judgment, your priorities, your ability to focus on business growth." What the board members didn't understand, what Marcus himself was still learning, was that his priorities had fundamentally shifted. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a grinding, often painful process of examining every aspect of his life and business through the lens of what Emma, Chloe, and Sophia had taught him about real values. It had started with small changes. Marcus began leaving the office by 6 p.m. to help with homework, attend parent-teacher conferences, and read bedtime stories. He'd hired Carol Hutchinson as a full-time nanny and family coordinator, but insisted on being present for the important moments. First days at new schools, medical appointments, bedtime conversations about their parents' memories. The girls had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience, but the transition hadn't been without challenges. Emma still woke up with nightmares about being separated from her sisters. Chloe struggled with anxiety in crowded places, remembering their days of hiding from authorities. Sophia continued to carry her family photograph everywhere, afraid that letting go of it meant losing her parents all over again. Marcus had learned to navigate these emotional landmines while simultaneously managing his own transformation. The hardest part wasn't changing his schedule or his living arrangements, it was changing his fundamental understanding of success and failure. "Let me explain something to all of you," Marcus said to his board, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire but now served a different purpose. 3 months ago, I thought I was successful because Davidson Industries generated billions in revenue. I thought I was powerful because I could acquire companies, influence markets, and intimidate competitors. He clicked to a slide showing before and after photos of a low-income housing development that Meridian had acquired and converted to luxury condominiums. But success built on other people's suffering isn't success, it's exploitation. And power that comes from making others powerless isn't strength, it's cowardice. The boardroom erupted in protests, but Marcus continued over their objections. "The Patterson family lost their home because of our development practices. 63. Other families were displaced from that same building. How many children ended up homeless because we needed to maximize our return on investment?" Board member James Morrison, who had been with the company since its early days, stood up angrily. "Marcus, you're letting personal emotions cloud your business judgment. Those development projects created jobs, improved neighborhoods, and generated tax revenue. For whom?" Marcus shot back. "Jobs! For whom? Most of the displaced families couldn't afford to live in the neighborhoods we improved. We created wealth for investors while destroying communities for the people who actually lived there." The confrontation was interrupted by a soft knock on the boardroom door. Sarah, Marcus's assistant, peered in apologetically. "Mr. Davidson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's about the Patterson Foundation proposal." Marcus looked at his watch, realizing he'd run over on the board meeting. "Send her in. The board should hear this too." A woman in her 30s entered the room, carrying a folder and looking somewhat intimidated by the corporate setting. Marcus recognized her immediately. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a social worker from the children's shelter where he'd been volunteering since taking guardianship of the girls. "Dr. Walsh, thank you for coming. Please tell the board about your research into housing displacement and its impact on children." Jennifer looked around the room nervously before beginning. "In the past 5 years, King County has seen a 43% increase in family homelessness. The primary cause isn't unemployment or addiction, it's housing costs. Families like the Pattersons are being priced out of communities they've lived in for generations. She opened her folder and pulled out photographs. These are some of the children I work with. All of them became homeless when their families were displaced by development projects. The average age is 8 years old. Marcus watched his board members' faces as Jennifer continued her presentation. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared skeptical, but a few seemed genuinely moved by the human stories behind the statistics. The Patterson girls were lucky, Jennifer concluded. They found someone willing to help. But for every story like theirs, there are dozens of children who fall through the cracks. After Jennifer left, the boardroom fell silent. Finally, William Hartwell spoke up. Marcus, we understand your emotional connection to this issue, but you can't solve social problems by destroying a profitable business model. I'm not destroying anything, Marcus replied. I'm rebuilding it. Let me show you what I mean. He clicked to a comprehensive slide showing his restructuring plan. Phase 1, convert 30% of our luxury developments to mixed-income housing. Phase 2, establish the Patterson Foundation with $50 million in initial funding to provide emergency assistance to families facing displacement. Phase 3, partner with local organizations to create job training programs in construction and property management, giving displaced families pathways to stable employment. Dorothy Chen studied the financial projections. These changes will reduce our profit margins by at least 40%. In the short term, yes, Marcus acknowledged, but they'll also create sustainable, community-based revenue streams. More importantly, they'll ensure that our success doesn't come at the expense of other families' survival. The debate continued for another hour, with Marcus facing increasingly hostile questions from board members who felt their comfortable wealth was being threatened by his conscience. The tension finally came to a head when James Morrison issued an ultimatum. Marcus, I've known you for 15 years. I've watched you build this company from nothing into a Fortune 500 corporation. But this isn't you. This is some kind of midlife crisis brought on by playing father to 3 kids who aren't even your responsibility. The comment hit a nerve that Marcus didn't know he still had. Not my responsibility. Those 3 girls became my responsibility the moment I found them sleeping in our parking garage. But you know what, James? They're not the only ones who are my responsibility. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city where thousands of people were working, struggling, and dreaming. Every family displaced by our developments is my responsibility. Every child who goes hungry because their parents can't afford rent after we gentrify their neighborhood is my responsibility. Every person whose life is affected by the decisions we make in this boardroom, they're all my responsibility. He turned back to face the board. And if you can't accept that level of accountability, then maybe you shouldn't be making decisions that affect other people's lives. The ultimatum was clear. Adapt to his new vision or leave. Over the following weeks, 4 board members resigned, unwilling to accept reduced profits in exchange for social responsibility. But 3 new members joined, including Dr. Jennifer Walsh and, to everyone's surprise, Robert Patterson, who had moved to Seattle permanently to be part of his niece's lives. The transformation wasn't just happening in the boardroom. At home, Marcus was learning to be a father figure to 3 children who tested his patience, challenged his assumptions, and taught him daily lessons about unconditional love. Emma had appointed herself as the family's social conscience, regularly suggesting ways to help other families in need. Chloe had developed a passion for architecture, designing houses where poor people can afford to live. Sophia continued to struggle with loss and abandonment, but she'd begun sharing stories about her parents that helped Marcus understand the kind of people Michael and Sarah Patterson had been. The most difficult moment came 6 weeks into their new life together, when Sophia had a complete breakdown after Marcus missed her school play due to a board meeting. He found her in her room, crying over the family photograph, convinced that he was going to abandon them just like everyone else had. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Marcus said, sitting on her bed and pulling her into a hug. "The meeting ran late, and I should have left anyway." "Daddy never missed anything important," Sophia sobbed. "Mommy said he always put family first." The accusation stung because it was true. Marcus had prioritized business over the people who mattered most, just as he'd always done. But this time, instead of making excuses or promises he might not keep, he made a decision that surprised even him. "You're right," he said simply. "I made the wrong choice today, but I'm going to make sure it never happens again." The next morning, Marcus announced to his executive team that he would no longer take meetings or calls between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. on school days. Board meetings would be rescheduled to accommodate school events. Business trips would be limited to emergencies only. His assistant Sarah had looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Mr. Davidson, you have 17 board meetings scheduled for the next month, 3 investor presentations, and a merger negotiation in Chicago. Then reschedule." "To them," Marcus replied, "my priorities have changed." The transformation process was messy, expensive, and often painful. Marcus lost longtime colleagues, faced criticism from investors, and struggled daily with balancing his role as a CEO with his responsibilities as a guardian. But every evening, when he sat down to dinner with Emma, Chloe, and Sophia, listening to their stories about school and friends and dreams for the future, he knew he was finally building something that would last longer than quarterly profit reports. The real test would come in the months ahead, as his restructured company faced market pressures and his commitment to change faced the ultimate challenge, proving that businesses could be profitable while still putting people first. 2 years later, Marcus Davidson stood in the community center that bore his daughters' names, watching as dozens of families celebrated the grand opening of the Patterson Family Resource Center. The building, constructed on land that had once housed a luxury development project, now served as a beacon of hope for families facing housing instability, job loss, and the kind of crisis that had nearly destroyed Emma, Chloe, and Sophia. "Daddy, look!" Sophia called out, running toward him with a painting in her hands. At 9 years old, she had grown into a confident, artistic child who no longer carried her parents' photograph everywhere, though it still held a place of honor on the nightstand beside her bed. "I made this for the wall," the painting showed. Their family, Marcus, Emma, Chloe, Sophia, and now Uncle Robert and Aunt Ellen, who had moved to Seattle permanently, standing in front of a house with their arms around each other. But what made Marcus's throat tighten with emotion was the addition of 2 figures in the background, painted with golden light around them. "That's Mommy and Daddy," Sophia explained matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Chen said, when people we love die, they don't really go away. They watch over us and help us take care of other people." Mrs. Chen was the grief counselor who had helped all 3 girls process their losses over the past 2 years. The healing hadn't been quick or easy. There had been setbacks, difficult nights, and moments when Marcus wondered if love alone was enough to help children overcome such profound trauma. But slowly, steadily, the girls had found their way back to joy, while never forgetting the parents who had shaped their values. Emma, now 9, and already showing signs of the leadership qualities that had kept her sisters alive during their darkest days, approached with a clipboard and a serious expression. "The final count is 47 families helped this month," she reported. "That's 12 more than last month." Marcus smiled at his eldest daughter's dedication to tracking the resource center's impact. Emma had taken on the role of unofficial junior administrator, keeping detailed records of every family they helped and following up on their progress. Her bedroom wall was covered with thank you letters from children whose families had found stability through the Patterson Foundations. Programs. And the housing project? Marcus asked, knowing Emma would have those numbers too. 96 families moved into affordable housing in the past 6 months, she replied proudly. 0 evictions, and Mrs. Rodriguez from the old building sent us cookies last week. The transformation of Davidson Industries had exceeded even Marcus's most optimistic projections. Rather than destroying the company's profitability, the focus on community development had created new revenue streams and attracted investors who shared his vision of sustainable, ethical business practices. The mixed-income housing developments were not only profitable, but had waiting lists of families eager to live in communities where economic diversity was celebrated rather than segregated. Chloe ran up to join them, her face flushed with excitement. Uncle Robert says the playground. Equipment is finally installed. Can we go see? Robert Patterson had surprised everyone, including himself, by becoming not just a devoted uncle, but a passionate advocate for the foundation's work. His own real estate business in Ohio had been restructured along similar lines, and he'd become a national spokesperson for what the business press was calling compassionate capitalism. As they walked toward the playground, Marcus reflected on how profoundly his definition of success had changed. 2 years ago, he had measured his worth by stock prices, quarterly earnings, and market dominance. Now success meant Emma's laugh when she beat him at chess, Chloe's excited explanations of her architectural designs for child-friendly affordable housing, and Sophia's gradual healing from the trauma that had once made her afraid to trust anyone. The playground was everything Chloe had envisioned when she'd submitted her design to the architects. Accessible for children with disabilities, imaginative without being expensive to maintain, and surrounded by gardens where families could gather for community events. At the center stood a small memorial garden with a bench dedicated to Michael and Sarah Patterson, whose love for their daughters had ultimately transformed an entire corporation and countless lives. "Mr. Davidson," a voice called out from across the playground. Marcus turned to see Dr. Jennifer Walsh approaching with a teenage girl he didn't recognize. "I'd like you to meet someone special." The girl, probably about 16, stepped forward with a mix of shyness and determination. "Mr. Davidson, I'm Maya Rodriguez. My family was one of the first to receive help from the Patterson Foundation when I was 8 years old." Marcus remembered the case. A single mother with 3 children who had been evicted from their apartment when the building was sold for redevelopment. One of the early cases that had shown him the human cost of his business practices. "Maya is starting her senior year of high school," Dr. Walsh continued. "She's been accepted to the University of Washington's architecture program on a full scholarship. She wants to design affordable housing that helps families stay together." Maya pulled out a portfolio of her work, detailed drawings of housing complexes that prioritized community spaces, childcare centers, and small business opportunities. Her designs showed a sophisticated understanding of how architecture could either isolate families or bring them together. "I want to build places where kids like me don't have to be afraid of losing their homes," Maya said. "Places where families can grow and dream without worrying about being pushed out when the neighborhood gets too expensive." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he encountered the ripple effects of the foundation's work. Maya represented something far more valuable than any corporate acquisition or market victory. She was proof that investing in people's potential could create change that lasted generations. "Have you considered our internship program?" Marcus asked. "We're always looking for young architects who understand the communities they're designing for." As Maya's face lit up with possibility, Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, Mrs. Thompson from the shelter is here with some new families. She wants to show them around." Mrs. Thompson ran the emergency family shelter that had become a key partner in the foundation's work. Rather than simply providing temporary housing, they now offered comprehensive support services, job training, childcare, mental health counseling, and pathways to permanent housing. The Martinez family just arrived from California, Mrs. Thompson explained, as they walked toward a group of adults and children near the resource center's entrance. Their apartment building was demolished for a highway expansion, and they've been staying in their car for 2 weeks. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger at a system that could make an entire family homeless for the sake of infrastructure development. But that anger now had a productive outlet. The Foundation's rapid response team that could provide emergency housing, meals, and support within 24 hours. As they approached the Martinez family, Marcus saw something that stopped him in his tracks. 3 children, probably around the same age, Emma, Chloe, and Sophia had been when he found them, were standing close together with the protective wariness he remembered so well. The oldest girl had her arms around her younger siblings, and all 3 looked exhausted, scared, and trying to be brave. Emma, Chloe, and Sophia immediately gravitated toward the Martinez children, speaking to them in the gentle, understanding way that only kids who had survived similar trauma could manage. Marcus watched his daughters, for that's how he thought of them now, not as his legal wards, but as his children in every way that mattered, share their hard-won wisdom about surviving loss and finding hope. "It's going to be okay," he heard Emma tell the oldest Martinez girl. "We know what it's like to lose everything, but sometimes when you lose everything, you find something even better." The conversation continued as Mrs. Thompson and Marcus discussed the family's immediate needs. Temporary housing in one of the Foundation's family units, enrollment in local schools, job placement assistance for the parents, and counseling support for the children. "How many families are we helping now?" Marcus asked Mrs. Thompson as they filled out intake forms. "The Martinez family makes it an even 200 families currently in our active support programs," she replied. "But Marcus, I want you to know it's not just the numbers, it's the ripple effect. Families we helped 2 years ago are now volunteering to help newly arrived families. Children who were homeless themselves are tutoring other kids facing the same challenges. You've created something that grows and sustains itself." As the day wound down and the community center's grand opening celebration came to an end, Marcus found himself sitting on the memorial bench dedicated to Michael and Sarah Patterson. Emma, Chloe, and Sophia joined him, tired but happy from a day spent helping other families. "Do you think our first parents would be proud of what we're doing?" Sophia asked, looking up at the evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I think they'd be amazed," Marcus replied, putting his arms around all 3 girls. "Your father believed that wealthy people only cared about getting richer, but you 3 taught me that wealth is only meaningful if you use it to help others build wealth too, not just money, but wealth of opportunity, community, and hope." Emma leaned against his shoulder. "You know what I think?" "What's that, sweetheart?" "I think maybe we were supposed to find each other. Maybe everything that happened, the bad stuff and the good stuff, maybe it was all leading to this." Marcus looked around at the community center that had grown from 3 children's faith in his capacity to change. The playground where formerly homeless children played alongside kids from every economic background. The resource center where families found not just assistance, but dignity and hope. The affordable housing developments where economic diversity created stronger, more resilient communities. "You might be right," he said, "but I know one thing for sure. Finding you 3 in that parking garage was the best thing that ever happened to me." As they walked home together under the Seattle streetlights, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, he had been one of the city's most successful but isolated businessmen, living in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. Tonight, he was going home to a house filled with laughter, homework arguments, bedtime stories, and the kind of chaotic love that made life worth living. The Davidson Industries annual report would show that the company's community-focused approach had not only maintained profitability, but attracted a new generation of investors interested in sustainable, ethical business practices. The Patterson Foundation had helped over 1,000 families transition from crisis to stability. The affordable housing developments had waiting lists and had sparked similar projects in cities across the country. But the numbers, impressive as they were, told only part of the story. The real measure of success was in the 3 girls walking. Beside him, no longer the traumatized orphans he'd found sleeping in his parking garage, but confident young women who understood that their purpose in life was to help others find hope in their darkest moments. Emma, Chloe, and Sophia had lost their biological parents, but gained something equally precious: the knowledge that families can be chosen, that love can overcome loss, and that sometimes the most broken people can become the strongest healers. As they reached their front door, Marcus realized that he'd finally learned the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich was having money. Wealthy was having people who loved you, a purpose that mattered, and the ability to change lives for the better. The parking garage where it all began was now part of a community garden where neighborhood children learned to grow vegetables and flowers. Where there had once been concrete and despair, there was now life, growth, and endless possibility. And sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Marcus would walk through that garden and remember 3 little girls who had taught him that the greatest success in life wasn't building an empire. It was building a legacy of love that would outlast any corporate achievement. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. Because real change doesn't end with one person or one family, it spreads like ripples in a pond, touching lives that will touch other lives, creating waves of hope that can change the world, one family at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.